I do want to start with this, though. It's really interesting, Jeremy. We've been hearing from critics of the special counsel, from Robert Mueller, that they're leakers. They leak like this. And then you get the first indictments out, and Trump and everybody else are like, oh, this has nothing to do with the campaign. And then, boom. Then we get the other shoe drops. And my gosh. You sit there going, oh, they arrested him what? When? And they've held it for this long? It shows Bob Mueller runs an extraordinarily tight ship.
He does, and Manafort and Gates had gotten target letters, and since the news of the sealed indictments got out on Friday, everybody in Washington was wondering who it might be, and Manafort was on almost everybody's guest list. But when the news hit 90 minutes later that George Papadopoulos not only had been charged, but actually pled guilty and therefore was convicted of a crime of 18 U.S.C. 1001, lying to the feds, that showed that Bob Mueller had not only one scalp, but he actually now had a major cooperating witness.
So we'll get to the Manafort news in just a moment, but perhaps the most surprising development yesterday was the third man charged, one who has admitted to crimes and is cooperating with the government's investigation. George Papadopoulos admitted to lying to the FBI in its investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election. Yesterday's revelation shows he was arrested more than 3 months ago on July 27th and pled guilty on October 5th. A court filing says that Papadopoulos told the FBI that he had communicated with an overseas professor whom he understood to have substantial ties to Russian government officials before he became a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, and that Papadopoulos acknowledged that the professor had told him about the Russians possessing, quote, dirt on then-candidate Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails, all before joining the campaign. But in truth, Papadopoulos learned he would be an advisor to the campaign in early March of 2016 and met the professor later due to his status with the campaign. The filing says the professor told Papadopoulos about the thousands of emails on or about April 26, 2016, after he had been a foreign policy advisor to the campaign for over a month. To review the timeline, that is a month after Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta's emails were hacked, and nearly 2 months before the first DNC hack was made public, and 3 months before President Trump made this joke.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Well, I don't think it was a joke, actually.
Yeah.
I think he actually...
It seemed like a proclamation.
What's the impact when you're looking at this and you look at everything that's happened? The hacking, the release of the emails through WikiLeaks, the meeting with the Russian lawyer in Don Jr.'s office, Donald Trump lying, orchestrating the big lie about that meeting. Where does this all fit in to the overarching narrative?
Well, it shows, Joe, how aggressive Russian intelligence was at not only engaging in propaganda during the campaign. And there's a lot of information back from the intelligence community's assessment that was published in January of this year about that propaganda. But now we're learning much more about their agents, how they spotted, assessed, recruited, and handled their agents. And this professor, I feel like we need to do air quotes every time we say the word professor, because he clearly was a Russian intelligence operative, a cutout, someone who was recruited by the Russian intelligence services to handle a potential asset deep inside the Trump campaign.
And the Russians don't go after, quote, volunteers, people with, quote, limited roles in the campaign. It's just the way Sarah Sanders described George Papadopoulos yesterday. They found a mark, someone who sits in national security meetings. His name was George Papadopoulos. They reached out to him, and he showed an interest, just as Donald Trump Jr. did in that meeting in June of 2016, in getting dirt from a Russian entity about Hillary Clinton, plain and simple.
But I mean, there's so many marks here. It's like, we don't hear this happening with the Chinese. We don't hear this happening with other countries.
And you had a candidate all the time who just loved Russia.
Yeah, the first two people I think he listed with Washington Post in that editorial board meeting, Carter Page and this guy, both of them went to, both of them were connected with Russia. You look at the National Security Advisor, Flynn, goes over to Russia, sits next to Putin, gets paid. I mean, this is, one after another, after another, after another.
Yes, and in a huge criminal case like this, and this is a huge criminal case, obviously, there's a window that opens a little to give you an insight into what else is going on. The Papadopoulos window is huge. It raises all sorts of questions. How does the special prosecutor get to Papadopoulos? Who tips them off about Papadopoulos? The fact that there's July to October, that there's no word of that the indictment has been handed down and that the plea has been made. So that shows that the special prosecutor is both aggressive, incredibly tightly held information, and the Papadopoulos information has the one key word that should frighten everybody in the White House, and that key word is guilty.
Yeah.
And Heidi, your thoughts on this? I also should just point out there was so much criticism. You had Donald Trump on the show so much during the campaign. Actually, it came on our show and we questioned him repeatedly about Russia. And repeatedly now, on tape, there is this president, then candidate, just refusing, even in the most extreme cases of telling him Putin murders reporters, and him refusing to say anything bad about Russia. That all now is available to everybody. It was available to the American people when we were interviewing him, and showing this incredible disparity, this difference in the way he would talk about some people versus others. Putin always being in the good category, somebody that he would protect, defend, and Russia being something that he just wouldn't touch.
Well, if you noticed yesterday, Mika, there was a tweet storm that fell silent once the Papadopoulos news came out, because now we are getting hotter on the question of collusion, because now you have a second campaign official, in addition to Don Jr., who was actively, it's documented, actively seeking to potentially collude with the Russians. The Russians were aggressive. They were shopping these emails, and they had a receptive potential buyer here in these high-level aides. And I think, in addition to what Mike Barnacle said about words that should chill the Trump campaign and Trump officials, in those court papers, it said next to Papadopoulos' name, proactive cooperator. Right. It's been covered that he pled to a less serious charge, and that is a classic case of him cooperating now with officials. And I think if we learned anything from the announcement yesterday, the fact that this was kept under wraps for so long, that Papadopoulos has been working with them for months, is that Mueller knows way more than we know. Is that despite the president's complaining about leaks and this administration's railing about leaks, this is actually being kept quite quiet, and this is only the beginning of charges, either for Manafort and for additional people, and we simply don't know where the top of the fish head is.
And Jeremy, several people last night giving examples in the past how that term, proactive witness, actually has meant in past court filings somebody that would even wear a wire.
Yeah, because since he was arrested on July 27th, coming off an aircraft at Dulles International Airport outside Washington, he's been basically under the control of the FBI, and he's not only turned over all documents he has, and they probably were already in his emails, but he potentially could have been wearing a wire and baiting other campaign officials and even potentially current White House officials into talking to him. One thing about this issue about him being a volunteer.
And by the way, the danger of that, before we move on and then we'll go to volunteer, the danger of that is, if he called others and said, hey, I'm in trouble, and they're sitting there telling him, to lie. Yes. Or hey, why don't you just say that, ... Suddenly, you're in the realm of obstruction of justice, right?
That's right, getting their story straight. That's exactly right. On the issue of the volunteer, real quick, who else were volunteers? Don Jr., Eric, Ivanka, Jared. I don't think being a volunteer exonerates you from having responsibility. In fact, most of the top echelon of the Trump campaign were volunteers.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.